right-wingers are fantastic at making things short, simple, not all of the time the best commentary in my opinion, but short and simple, very good at that. Left-wingers are absolutely terrible at that, and that's what it felt like with Defund the Police.
In 2019, the Atlanta City Council voted to build a $90 million training facility for police, firefighters, and EMTs. The protesters deemed Cop City. Old parks and forests will need to be cleared for the 85-acre area to build shooting ranges, classrooms, mock cities, SWAT practice facilities, and roads, even for high-speed chases. So protests began called Stop Cop City to stop the city of Atlanta from clearing forests and building what they saw as a new way to militarize the police. Protesters have been camping in forests, allegedly throwing in Molotov cocktails and trespassing, leading to the death of one protester after being shot 57 times. Shortly after Donald Trump was charged with racketeering in Fulton County, there were also 61 Stop Cop City protesters who were also charged with racketeering. So today we're going to discuss the building of the facility, the protests, and the arrests. We'll give everybody opening statements, and then we'll kind of go around and ask some questions for a little bit, and then we'll get into some open discussion. So, Dylan, if you want to do an opening statement first, you have 2 minutes.
Sure. So I don't want to concentrate on stuff I know less about, and so I am not the most well versed on police training policies. I know just as much as the next guy on this platform, so not much. But what I did do is I served on my city's environmental board for a year, and before, of course, the war. And in that time period, I mostly concentrated on tree canopy conservation and green space conservation. And Atlanta is known for its beautiful green space, as being a city with still like 48% of its green space and tree canopy being preserved, removing millions upon millions of pounds of pollutants and carbon out of the air every year. And where this training facility is in an area that has higher rates of asthma, higher rates of pollutants in the river, in the South River, which is at risk of not only higher rates of pollution and stormwater runoff, with a 75% increase of rainfall in the region over the last, I think, 1 or 2 years. I think that demolishing more of that green space should be done with extreme hesitancy, and only done if absolutely necessary. And due to the opposition I've seen from local activists and locals, definitely with the submission of over 116,000 petition signatures, voicing opposition to Cop City, at the very least, the democratic process should take hold. This is the bare minimum. The democratic process should take hold in the local residents who are going to have to live in ear range of the gunshots being fired off at the gun range, which many of them already have to deal with, but now it's going to be expanded. I think they should have a say in that. And from the city survey they did in 2021, it showed that 70% of the people who came to voice support or opposition, 70% were against it. Now, I'm not saying that we know for sure what is the percentages in the area who support the facility being built or not support the facility being built. But what's going on right now with the petition signatures being denied after the extension and then removing the extension is just complete anti-democratic bullshit. And it's hard probably to convince a lot of locals and activists to reserve, I think, maybe more violent action if they think that the democratic system that is put in place that they could go to and try to take advantage of, which is how the city deals with petition, to get the 53,000 signatures and do a referendum on the issue. If that's not being respected and they can't use a legal avenue to try to prevent this and show opposition, then what other avenue are you leaving people? I'm not saying that people should go out and throw Molotovs at cops or anything. What I am saying is if you take away the legalistic systems that you put in place specifically for the scenario that you've told residents that they could use, that they wanted, and then deny them that, it's going to cause problems. I think the tree canopy of Atlanta, Georgia is a top priority to stop stormwater runoff, stop water pollution, and protect the South River. Thank you.
All right. My camera is frozen here, so I will be messing with this in the meantime, but go ahead.
It's a good angle, though. It's a good angle to be frozen on.
It was, yes.
Got a good Brotherhood of Nod vibe going.
Yeah, President Sunday, if you want to do your opening statements.
Sure thing. So this is going to be a bit redundant because Dylan already canvassed most of the stuff that I'm going to cover, but that's your problem. So the primary issue with the police training center in Atlanta, or Cop City, as its critics have called it, is that the development has been pushed through in the most undemocratically, in fact, I would say anti-democratically way imaginable. Despite recognition by former Mayor Keisha Bottoms that opposition is widespread on not only political and social but also environmental grounds, I imagine it's obvious why you shouldn't be putting lead and explosive debris in proximity to fresh water sources, to say nothing of the environmental destruction that will come from paving the site. And despite the justifications for the site, including such dubious reaches, is that it will boost morale among the police, as if this was a satisfying justification for turning one of the largest green spaces in South Atlanta, which is majority black, into a police hub. Indeed, the current mayor, Andre Dickens, attempts to stall a petition which would trigger a citywide vote on the installation and also amount to a tacit acknowledgement that it is at minimum deeply unpopular. I mentioned that Southern Atlanta is majority black to highlight that amidst the ongoing issue of addressing systemic racism with respect to policing, to which the aforementioned former Mayor Bottoms paid lip service in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, it is a majority black community that is now having its green space further destroyed and polluted, which is why you see the term environmental racism in frequent conjunction with this issue. Atlanta police now have also the distinction of instigating the first killing of an environmentalist by police in American history, as far as I'm aware, after a clear out of tents occupying the site in protest resulted in one protester, as Tom mentioned earlier, being shot, coroners finding no less than 57 bullet wounds on their body. We don't have any camera footage of this. We have two competing coroner's reports as to whether or not he had evidence of firing a gun, but he apparently did have a gun recovered on his person. We just don't know. Either way, 57 is a number. In some, even leaving aside the fact that providing further military training to the police, and make no mistake, this is what this installation is meant to impart. In fact, a letter circulated by Governor Brian Kemp explicitly cites as a rationalization for the project that it will increase arrests, will do nothing to solve the rising crime rates. And considering that Georgia already houses the largest police training campus in the country, I believe, if somebody wants to correct me on this, this is a purely negative development. But to reiterate, the primary issue with Cop City is that its implementation lays bare the sham of representative democracy in the city, further breaking faith with an already catastrophically disaffected citizenry. The estimated $90 million it will cost to establish this installation would be better spent on infrastructure, fighting poverty, mental illness, unemployment, homelessness, or by throwing the money into a fire. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then STV Philly.
I'm going to second President Sunday, what he said. Also, Dylan brought up absolutely everything needed to be said on the environmental side. So I think those two counters to this police project have been sufficiently, argued against. I want to take a different route. I don't think. Okay, so for this to work for me, for me to be in favor of this is how I started my thought process. What would it take for me to approve of a $90 million police training facility that is going to further militarize the police? What would it take? Number one, the police department in question, the Atlanta Police Department, would have to have earned this right, and they fail miserably on almost any score you want to give them. But we'll get into the nuances of that. I really want to talk about Atlanta's job of policing during this conversation. But for the sake of my opening argument, I was looking for concrete data on police, like how widespread is the police brutality problem in this country. And I found a study, which I will link in a second, which was done by a few academics with grants from from the Department of Justice, excuse me. And the study it looked at thousands of cases over a 6-year period from 2009 to 2015, I believe. And the study challenges the perception that police crimes, which as people have argued are isolated incidents involving only a small group of officers, So this study kind of contradicts those statements. It reveals a regular occurrence of arrest across various locations and types of communities. So we're talking rural, small town, suburbs, large urban centers. The data provided in this study contradicts the prevailing assumption that only a handful of rotten apples are responsible for the majority of police crimes, suggesting a more systemic issue. I think it does a good job of proving that. The study also emphasizes that police crime is largely influenced by the occupational context in which the officers operate, meaning the cops are more likely to commit crimes out of opportunity. They have very little oversight when they're out on patrol. The crimes are often covered up or encouraged to be falsified. They are in close proximity to drugs, to sex workers, to all types of criminals, which exposes them more to. I guess to make this more cleaner. It exposes them to the criminal element and makes them and would turn an otherwise good guy, quote unquote, into a criminal. And this study, in excruciating detail, this is a 697-page study. I didn't have time to read it all, excuse me. And there's a lot of numbers, formulas showing you how they did their work. But the conclusion is that the study, it paints a comprehensive picture of police crime as a widespread, occupationally influenced, and complex phenomenon with interconnections among various types of offenses. The findings challenge, like I said, the traditional assumptions of rotten apples, quote unquote. With that in mind, the police need to earn, I think, $90 million in taxpayers' money to build things like this. So I'll just put it like I'll leave it there for now.
All right. So, Philly, can I ask you then, do you think that the issues with the police department has more to do with oversight, or do you think more training would be helpful?
So both, but if you're asking me which I would weigh heavier, I would say oversight, because police, like if you just took if police followed their training to a T, like right now with most police departments, the way it is, if they followed their training to a T, I don't think many Americans would have a lot of complaints. The issues are police stepping over the line, falsifying documents, covering up for each other. So I think the oversight would be a bigger factor in solving some of these issues.
Okay. And Dylan, do you know what percentage of the forest is being removed?
No clue.
You have no clue? Because I wonder, like, I know 85 acres is a lot, but if it's like a small percentage of the forest that's being removed, wouldn't that change whether or not the how much of like pollutants are being removed by the forest? It may not make that big of a difference if it's like.
If I can jump in there, not necessarily, because the issue is with lead poisoning being carried by fresh water. It's not simply the fact that it's polluting the dirt on which the bullets and the explosives are falling. This stuff gets carried away by animals, by rainfall, et cetera, by rivers. There are apparently several freshwater, or at least one freshwater river nearby. The geography eludes me a little bit. There's a good Jacobin article about this. It's not simply the case that what gets dropped in a zone of grass or dirt stays in that zone. Nature is kind of dynamic that way. It will go outwards. When you combine this with the fact that apparently they're trying to greenwash the whole project, I think by trying to turn part of it into a park, part of it into even like a food growing center, like a farm, it's like you're using poisoned earth for this as a consequence of what they're already using the ground for. Like it is already being used for explosive testing and as a firing range. So it's a matter of making it worse, not necessarily. It isn't, to be clear, like destroying virgin forest or something.
If I can just add, I'm sorry, Tom, you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Dylan,
respond?
Yeah, go ahead, Dylan. Yeah.
So, I could imagine if there was a deep call from within the community saying, look, we love our forests, we hate the idea of, explosives being tested near the South River, one of already the most endangered rivers in the United States. It was declared that in 2019. The EPA, local environmental organizations and the city of Atlanta, I believe, all said in 2010 that they needed to clean out the South River and do it by 2020, and they failed to do it, and then they extended it into 2025. Now, if they're willing to, if there's such a crisis with crime in the community that this will somehow solve, that they're willing to give that up, then I'd be like, okay, I can't really say anything if it's gotten that bad. But the problem is, number one, why couldn't they use other alternatives outside of the green space? It's not like there aren't abandoned buildings in the city of Atlanta. There isn't areas that they could have taken instead. In 2019, the city declared that this area was the lungs of Atlanta. So just a few years ago, before they started talking about Cop City, they declared it's the lungs of Atlanta. We need to clear out the South. There's all these different priorities that they have. And immediately, once the national, not the National Police, but the Atlanta Police Foundation comes out and says, hey, maybe we'll finance part of the project. We'll take some Waffle House money. We'll take some UPS money. We'll take money from all these companies that have contributed to our group. We'll cover a good, 33% of it overall. It only cost taxpayers $67 million to have these explosives pollute the river. Now, if they were willing to deal with all that and they accepted that, then I would be like, oh, it's their community, not mine. At the end of the day, I believe in democracy. But they're not even allowing the people to have a say on this. And when you say all these things out loud and you realize that they were just calling it a few years ago the lungs of Atlanta, I think it makes sense that they want to preserve that.
Just to add to that very quickly as well, isn't it a bit rich that they've been accusing the protesters of being from out of area, and that in some sense their protest is illegitimate when the entire thing is being funded and pushed at a very great distance from home. This is not something that is being funded from within the community. The Atlanta Police Department accepts donations, not the police department, the Atlanta Police Foundation accepts donations from all over the place. Although even that's a little bit tricky because they have Atlanta Police Department.
Waffle House cops. Waffle House contributes to them. Why is Waffle House funding a police training facility? By the way, the way we finance police training facilities and police departments is absolutely bizarre.
I don't know. Maybe Waffle House has been a little bit violent lately. I think also Philly. How do you prefer to be referred to, by the way? STV or Philly or?
Yeah, you can call me Philly. It's fine.
Philly. Okay. You brought up a good point about like, yeah, obviously cops need training, but I think it would be worth highlighting the type of training involved. So as I understand it, and there's two things in here that just really clinch this for me. The type of training involved is going to be training involving a mock city. So I'm interpreting that as essentially riot suppression training, explosive testing. So breaking and entering with essentially military-grade equipment, and a firing range. This is only military training. This is not the kind of training that's going to improve relations between the police and the citizenry, leaving aside the fact that the way in which the place is being pushed on the public of South Atlanta is breaking faith with them altogether already, even in advance of it even training any cops. But in addition to this, and I mentioned this in my opening, Georgia already houses a massive police training campus. Send them there, or do any of this there. It's I don't know. It's kind of remarkable. Yeah.
I find it. I just find it weird that a lot of people that proclaim to be right wing, not weird because obviously the right wing support the police, but to support such a massive expansion of government potential power, I guess you could say, because as Sunday just pointed out, all this is going to do is further militarize the police, and that I think is going in the wrong direction of the type of policing we need in here in America. I don't know if you guys, just real quick, we don't even have to go deep into it, but are you guys familiar with what Camden did a few years ago, like with disbanding their police force and coming up with a whole new set of abuse of force like policies and procedures, and they have been like a model of ways to kind of restructure police departments. And yeah, just real quick, if anybody has heard of that, I think that is like the way that policing with that, there needs to be a middle ground between, you know, militarized police and what Camden did. We have to find somewhere in the middle that works, because obviously this is not what Camden did is not going to be replicable on a larger scale. I don't think, like in like say New York City or Philadelphia or Los Angeles. I don't think.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that actually, because I have stats here on. Or I had stats. I don't know if I have them. Oh, do I not have those ready? Damn. Well, I was looking at stats just out of curiosity as to where Georgia fell in terms of police killings per year. And I think the scale was on like 2.5 out of 1 million, which puts it sort of smack dab in the middle of the range. New York's like high at the top with very few. I think what was the worst one? It was Montana, I think.
Really?
Yeah. No, like these are killings in particular. You can't really extrapolate too much from that, but it is interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think I agree with you. I think there's a middle ground between, like, the whole notion of disband the police or defund the police. I think the problem with that as a slogan, and I don't know how you'd overcome it, is that it gives a radically different impression to different people depending on who you're talking to. So when I hear defund the police, I think end the militarization of the police, put some kind of cap on foundations like the APF, arming the police with weapons they have no business using on the civilian population, their own civilian population, so on and so forth. When other people hear defund the police, they think have an anarchist utopia where everything's just Burning Man and there are no rules or something like that, and magically people will just get along despite the fact that you've addressed literally nothing else in the course of doing so. And then other people think it means like a scaling back of the size of police forces, which are already actually pretty small despite how much funding they receive. So I mean, like, I don't know if you can even judge on the basis of crime rates whether or not a scaling back of the police at any one of these dimensions makes sense, simply because the causes are not directly related to the police themselves. They're related to broader things that the police can either aggravate or sort of band-aid over, or just do nothing to, you know?
Well, just to give some more info from what I read through the planning, the city planning, was that the housing parts were for, like, they have like a cul-de-sac area with a bunch of houses. This was for SWAT, firefighters, EMTs, like, all to actually engage within urban development where there might be issues, where they're capable of running into houses. And it's not just for the Atlanta City Police Department. It's also going to be for police all over the world to be able to go there and use the training facilities and rent them out for a while. And it should help build industry around there as well.
I do actually have Atlanta City's budget, I think, for this year. Yeah, let me pop that up so I have.
Could I say something quick about the defund the police slogan?
Yeah.
What gets me about the defund the police slogan is there's so many other slogans that could be so much more unobjectionable, very hard for anyone to get away from or criticize, that would be much better for any movement that's trying to protect people from the police. And while police are there to protect people, there also has to be things in place to protect people from the police. For example, protect our rights, right? Like, that's a simple... I'm not proposing this specific slogan, but that's a simple slogan. It's very hard for anybody to oppose that. Like, yeah, protect my First Amendment rights, protect my rights from unreasonable search and seizure, protect my rights from being brutalized and being stopped and searched without probable cause. Like, these are things that if you just say it out like that, nobody could really get against it. But defund the police, what gets me about that is there are a lot of communities. My father, when I went up to visit my father, was always in Hagerstown. And when I went up to certain areas in West Virginia, there was a problem of police response time. And if somebody was to say in here, defund the police, somebody's going to think, oh, now police response time is going to get worse. Because now the cops can't come out and visit us. The cops can't come out and save us. The cops can't come out and protect me if some person is breaking into my home. And police response time in many communities is a real problem, either because they're basically doing a rent-a-cop program from another area. That's what my city did with the Prince George's County Police Department, and that's what a lot of other communities are dealing with. So there needs to be more specifics when we say defund militarization, but also increase community integration to make sure that police are more responsive to community needs.
I want to agree with you very quickly, and then I'll shut up for a little bit because I've talked a lot. I want to agree with you very quickly, and then I want to push back a tiny bit. So to your point, one of the defenses of Cop City was sort of a blasé, like everybody's like defund the police until you have to call 911. And so the implication, of course, is that defund the police means the absence essentially of police. But to push back a little bit, and this is more of a, I guess, a strategy point. I do wonder the extent to which defund the police, which is already kind of like a watering down of abolish the police, got more attention as a consequence of its bombacity than it would have otherwise. And I wonder if a more practical slogan would have had the same uptake it did. And I wonder if there's like a balancing act you kind of have to play there, because it's like a slogan that is inoffensive and clear, but which nobody repeats is not very effective either.
The problem,
which is not in favor of like misleading slogans, to be clear. I just wonder.
Yeah, I think my thing is about slogans is you don't want to have to release a paragraph when you say a slogan, right? You don't want to say a slogan is like, okay, let me explain the nuance of what I just said. Like, it's the leftist meme thing, right? You can't just make it, like, the right-wingers are fantastic at making things short, simple, not all of the time the best commentary in my opinion, but short and simple, very good at that. Left-wingers are absolutely terrible at that. And that's what it felt like with defund the police, because I'd be like, okay, defund the police. So do you mean police retraining programs? Well, no, I want to put more money into police retraining programs. What I meant is defund in this area, but actually take some of that money and put it into community housing programs and also police retraining. So you do actually want to, in this area, you want to fund the police. And it's, yeah, well, that's different. And would you want to increase police response times in communities affected by high amounts of crime? Yeah, okay, I'd want to fund for that. But specifically, I want to defund this area. And once you're in that super nuanced conversation with somebody, you've already lost them. Most people don't want to sit with an activist on their porch and hear that.
Easy solution: demilitarize the police. Same brain, same meaning.
Absolutely fantastic. I agree with that 100%.
Well, so that's kind of what I was trying to push back against a little bit, though, is a lot of the everything that I've looked into, at least on this building project, is that I don't actually see anything that actually militarizes the police. Normally, when I think of militarizing the police, I think of like equipment, right? Like giving them bigger guns, giving them tanks, giving them certain things like that. Whereas in this case, like, it's just the urban housing that seems to scare everybody and make them feel like it's militarizing the police. Yet, like I said, when I looked into it, it was about like having EMTs be able to work in there, have firefighters work in there, have police work in, like, you know, SWAT breaking into houses, stuff like that. And so it doesn't, like, I just didn't see a whole lot of evidence of militarizing the police, while that was definitely one of the biggest concerns when it came to stopping Cop City.
Well, with militarizing the police, I mean, the training they're giving is essentially militarization. You don't need a firing range to figure out how to apprehend people in a peaceful way or to de-escalate situations. You don't need explosive testing for that. I think the one positive thing that is attached to this installation is that apparently they have these, I don't know what they are exactly, but these things called fire towers that they're going to practice. I guess firefighters can also do some training there. Mm-hmm. But like nobody's objecting to this thing because some firefighters association wants to help people save lives. This is essentially, this is pretty explicitly actually part of a concerted effort to meet violent crime with violent crime.
Yeah, I think the shooting of the protester perfectly encapsulates the problem of what people are, complaining about. So as far as I know, the protester was trespassing on this land that they're planning to use, right? And he had been there for, correct me if I'm wrong, a few months, right, with a group of people, and the police came in and so it's a few things are unclear, but what is clear is that right now the only law he broke is trespassing, and he was shot over 50 times, or shot at over.
Well,
50
I mean,
times.
according to the police report, he shot first, so that's another law that he's breaking.
They haven't been able to
questionable.
They haven't. Yeah, right. That's questionable, and also if his arms were raised is questionable, like the position he was in.
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
the family hired an independent medical examiner, and they concluded
Yes.
that due to the bullet, he was shot 57 times. And due to the bullet holes entering his hand at a certain angle, they're saying it looked like he might have had his hands up. It's still inconclusive. We don't know for sure.
Well,
I
what
mean,
they said,
it doesn't matter where he puts
what the reports, right? Well, yeah, you're right, because no, Dylan, I know what you're talking about. What they said was that the exit wounds were coming from his palm, which would suggest that he was shielding himself, like, you know.
Well, and from his feet, I think, because they kept shooting him after he was on his back as well.
And
a lot of the angles were coming down.
From what I understand, so they couldn't actually see him. So they just know bullets are coming out, and they all just start flooding bullets in, just for the audience to.
So just hold on real quick, Sunday, just to finish.
No, please, sorry, I do this. I wasn't.
No, it's okay. It's no problem. So, but what adds to this problem is, you see all the questions we just had here. The police is doing exactly what people complain about them doing, which is muddying things up, not being transparent, not being forthcoming with information, saying, "Oh, we can't release the body cam footage because of the investigation." When this happened back in April,
January.
March, April. This was January. That long. So we're talking a lot, like 10 months now. Yeah. So I think this like I said, perfectly encapsulates the issue that people have with the way police handle business. If police were transparent and, you know, they treated people with respect, I mean, I don't care. I'm not the type of person that's going to be like, see, look, you locked up more black people than white people, therefore you're racist. I mean, as long as you're treating everybody fairly, that's what I care about. And police departments, you can look up any police department in this country, look up that department plus scandal or corruption, and you will find, FBI reports, you will find Department of Justice reports, but nothing ever changes. They're repeatedly called out. We're repeatedly showed the problems, but things really don't change. And this case is a perfect case of that.
I think very quickly, I mean, once again, to the point about the protester, even if you take the police at their word, and he fired first 4 shots, 57 rounds, that's a lot. That's a lot of wounds. And these are the ones that hit him. This is kind of, I struggle to imagine a situation in which that isn't the epitome of excessive. But moreover, and this is something else as well, when you're talking about selling a police military training facility, I think it's fair to characterize it that way, to the public of South Atlanta. Georgian police, especially in Atlanta, have a very sketchy history when it comes to brutality. If anyone's familiar with the what was called the Red Dog Unit, this was
I've been harassed by them many times. I am well aware of them.
Yeah.
I'm in Atlanta, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, are you really? Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I'm not. So I'm reading this at some distance. But this was part of a general drug crackdown, and they were known for operating outside of the realm of acceptability, we'll say. People would be shaken up and pretty frequently brutalized, and of course this is long before we even had the notion of putting body cameras on people. So I mean, let alone not good.
And let's keep it real. The police face a humongous perception problem, and especially among black people in Atlanta. And there's a huge difference, like, in the way that the average white American and the average black American view cops. So just a few numbers real quick. Black adults are about five times as likely as whites to say they've been unfairly stopped by the police because of their race or ethnicity. Now, of course, that's self-reporting. We don't have hard numbers on that, but these are just self-reporting surveys. Black men especially are 59% of black men say they've been unfairly stopped, by police. Okay, so yeah, and also, so here's another difference. Black Americans are far less likely than whites to give police high marks for the way they do their jobs. In 2016, only 1/3 of black adults said that police in their community did a, quote, excellent job or a, quote, good job in using the right amount of force, which those numbers are 33% compared to 75% of whites. They also say that Yeah, the numbers are similar when asking about treating racial and ethnic groups equally, and holding officers accountable for misconduct. Only 31% of blacks feel officers are held accountable for misconduct versus 70% of white people who feel that officers are held accountable. So we're kind of living in two different Americas here when it comes to police.
Just to very quickly bolster your point as well, like maybe it is indeed the case that these are self-reported incidents of being treated unfairly by black victims of police treatment. But as we've seen with the case of Manuel Tehran, the protester who was shot at the site, the police are also self-reporting that they're treating them fairly as well. So, like, it's
so yeah. So the thing with self-reporting is, like, obviously it's not as reliable as you would hope for, and when trying to suss out numbers, but from my lived experience, I have been stopped by the cops on a number of occasions because I used to live in a pretty wealthy neighborhood when I was younger, when I was like in my early teens. So I'd be walking home from a friend's house, maybe 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. Stopped, asked, where am I going? Why am I in this neighborhood? And this happened 5 different times. I remember, like, over the course of me living in that neighborhood. So yeah, I mean, it's just like I had all white friends up there at that time. None of them ever, none of them had that problem. And it's just, yeah, it's like these things are hard to kind of quantify in numbers, but just ask around and people will give you their self-attestment.
So, I mean, while I agree the shooting of Tortuguita was, like, odd, from police testimonies, there's some of it that seems to make sense to some degree. Like, if he's in a tent, there's like 30 police officers surrounding this tent, and then all of a sudden bullets come flying out of the tent. It seems like everybody would just release fire into this tent and try to, because they don't know
on his body.
They don't know how many people are in there, and they don't know if they're still shooting. They don't know which way they're facing.
I'm sure if law enforcement's put their best minds to it, they can think of a way to extract this guy out of the forest without killing him. I'm almost certain.
Not if he's shooting people. No.
Well, at that point,
he had a fucking handgun. Come on, like, what are we talking?
Get Israel on the job at this point.
He wasn't in there with like a fucking
handguns. It's not like those are like super.
Okay, I'm not saying that a handgun isn't.
They claim.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I'm talking over you. Sorry, you've got a very deep ASMR voice, so it goes in the background for me. I apologize. Keep going.
No, I was just gonna say, like, he had a handgun versus what the police are equipped with, and these were special tactics police, so they had the big guns. I'm not a big gun fanatic, so I don't know the names, but they had
some
the
of
big
them
ones.
There were I think 12 different units out there that day, all working together, scanning the books. So
come on, they could have got that guy out of there without killing him. But listen, that's not the police's priority. It seems it's not. It's not keeping everybody alive.
Seriously, Philly, come on. Seriously, you're saying he starts shooting out of a tent, and you're saying they could have gotten him out.
It's not just
but I'm saying
to them.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is with the understanding, or with the assumption that he actually shot from out of the tent. You're saying they could have gotten him out without killing him.
Yes.
So here's the problem. So there are discrepancies in the report, and they're subtle, but they're important. So the first is initially they thought that the officer who was injured, because remember they count 4 shots. I don't know who's counting or how they determined that number because there was no recording, but they report 4 shots. They initially thought that one of the officers that was shot was actually the result of friendly fire. A coroner's report and analysis later on determined that the bullet that hit the officer matched the gun, but they also haven't released how they came to these conclusions, both in the coroner's report and I think with the bullet. I could be wrong about that. In addition to all of this, we have a police department that has a reputation for brutality and being not upfront about what they do and how they act. There is simply absolutely no reason. I mean, first of all, even the clearing out of the protest by itself with cops already, as far as I'm concerned, constitutes the initiating act of aggression. So I don't have any particular sympathy for any cops to get hurt in the process of doing so. They're acting in a totally anti-democratic manner. But leaving that aside, we also have the independent coroner who determined that no, this is not the case. No, the person had their hands up. They were shot in both hands, which is why your hands would be here and not on your firearm. We simply have no reason to believe the people who are telling us that he fired first. And even if they did fire first, they were shot 57 times. 57 times. The police report says 4 times they fired out of the thing. That's you can't justify that. That's insane.
I mean, okay, so
I'm pretty sure after the first 30 shots, that gun was dropped.
I am super skeptical of all of this, especially with all of the surrounding issues. But there like questions not being answered and there being weird things doesn't mean that they're wrong. There is body cam footage showing that there are 4 shots that go off and then very different, like 40, 50 shots right after.
There was no body cam footage of this.
Not body cam footage from the site, from like 45 feet, 50 yards away from, there's body cam footage where you can actually hear all the gunshots going off, and then all of these police start running in towards where it happened. So you can only hear the gunshots from that one. But the
so just to be clear, so this the scenario you're painting is they hear poof, 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 and then a swarm of cops run in and just pepper this tent. They only, from the body cam footage, they only hear gunshots. These people did not shoot anything. Here, let me look this up.
But yeah,
Tom,
the point
we can't think of any way to get him out, like without killing him.
Okay, wait.
Not if
Even
you're shooting.
assuming he fired shots.
Wait. Let's hold up for a second. I want to say something quick. So, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said that they found residue from a 9mm shell that belonged to him, and that it was purchased, belonging to a handgun that he purchased back in 2020. Now, whether you believe them or not is a question that should be answered by more body cam footage being released so we can get as many angles as possible from as many police officers as possible. But, so I don't know for sure if he had his hands up or not. I don't know, so I can't claim. If he did shoot at them, then the officers have the right to shoot back. If he didn't shoot at them, then they murdered the guy in one of the most brutal executions in Atlanta history. But I do want to touch on this quickly. President Sunday, you said earlier that, like, if these cops get hurt, could you clarify that position? I just wanted to hear that again.
Oh, if these cops get hurt?
Yeah, something about the cops.
Oh, just that it's not particularly high on my level of priorities. Now, for the cops' perspective, they have to defend themselves. It is what it is. But as far
The
as
only reason, like, the way can I just be clear? The only reason I say that.
I want to hear President Sunday's answer to this. Important to me.
Yeah. So the movement of the cops into there, I think, is one of the most gross invitations to anti-democratic violence possible. Now, in terms of the individual policeman firing on somebody, firing at them, you cannot tell even a policeman to sacrifice their lives in the event that they deem that shooting back is the only way to protect theirs. That's how it works. 57 bullets. I cannot imagine a situation in which a single person with a handgun inside a tent. I cannot see where that is an appropriate use of force against that person.
Oh no, I think no matter what, either way, I think the cops turned in kind of shocked.
To be clear, if you were thinking that I think that cops' lives are expendable and that they should just take bullets, no.
No. I wanted to just make, because you said because of the democratic principle, the safety is not high on my list. I just wanted to know if, because they were fighting against something that might be opposed by the majority of residents, we don't know for sure, but we have a decent reason to believe that at least that this should be followed up on and there should be a citywide vote. That because of that, he had a.
Well, we know that Dickens is actually stalling the process, so they believe that at least. At least I think it's
the
a reasonable
11th Circuit.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, as you were. My apologies.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, so you're not okay with the cops getting shot. Just to
No.
100%. Okay.
God, no.
I just wanted to 100% clarify that. And as for SVT,
No, I just think when on balance, when you have the cops putting themselves into a situation in which they are endangering their lives, when they are doing so in the act of essentially subverting democratic action, my level of priority for their safety over the people they shoot shifts a little bit. That's what I'm saying. Does that make sense? What
would be the other way for the police to resolve this? Because my most Americans would say that the democratically elected representatives of the city of Atlanta voted for this to go forward, and there's another process, the process of collecting petitions, that these residents could have used to try to take a peaceful, non-violent avenue to resolve the issue. Now, the 11th Circuit Court seems to be fucking that up now, but that's happened in September. This guy was killed in January.
But crucially though, they aren't just fucking it up by themselves. They're fucking it up as a consequence of an appeal made by the current mayor, I believe. And so they're simultaneously hiding behind that in order to stall and subvert and potentially create the conditions under which they can arbitrarily pick out different signatures as being real or not. They have to match up, I believe, with the ones that are currently on record. People's signatures sometimes change over time. That's a thing that happens. I agree with you to a point. The problem, though, is that, and this is why I mentioned it sort of lays bare the sham of how representative democracy sort of works at the moment, because as a consequence of this, you have an election in which people will sell themselves as being for certain values and advocating on behalf of certain kinds of people. And then after the fact, for their entire term, there's literally nothing to hold them to account except for these petitioned votes that may or may not be able to be held in limbo indefinitely. So it's kind of a moot point to say that, well, the police are acting on behalf of a democratically elected official when the democracy ended at the plebiscite to put them in power, and at this point they're acting more or less arbitrarily.
Couldn't this be used to say that in any instance where your organization believes that the elected representative is not serving in the interest of the people, that you could move in, try to violently hold on to forest property of different things like that, where cops will inevitably have to move in to try to clear in the area because that's the job?
I mean, it could potentially, but it's precisely the same logic that justifies moving in cops to do violence in the first place as well. Yes, what you're fundamentally operating with is two competing conceptions of democratic legitimacy. One that locates its legitimacy in the single act of an official plebiscite, one that locates it in the actual will of the people that's being subverted by a process that is using that other thing as justification to run rampant over the will of the people. It's a very complicated problem. I don't think there's any actual.
You're saying by stopping the protests?
Sorry?
You're saying by stopping the protest and clearing the
by clearing out a protest with armed men with guns, yes.
But they're trespassing, right? So they're supposed to clear them out, no?
Well, they're trespassing presumably on the property of the city, yes. Like if we're talking about a police department or a police hub, we're talking about a training facility that's fundamentally for people who are governing those very citizens. It is a very perverse situation in which you are killing people for protesting a site in which cops are being trained to kill them further, and which will also pollute the environment and destroy green space from a predominantly black community in a state where there's been historic extreme violence by the police, unlawful violence.
I wanted to approach the thing STV Philly said quickly for a moment earlier because I didn't want to forget it.
I have to run to the washroom. Do you mind?
STV Philly, if he did shoot at the cops, then there's nothing they could do but shoot back at him, right?
Right. So this is what I was trying to clear up. What I was trying to do there was just have an exercise with Tom with if we can think of a way of 12 law enforcement agencies, if we can think of a way that they can extract a person from a fixed location. They know where he is. They know where they are. They're in this surrounded forest where there's nowhere to go. Could we think of a way to extract these people without killing them, without getting an officer shot? Like, is there a better way they put themselves in danger? Obviously, the officer could have died. So, can we think, and this goes to police training, can we think of better ways for police to handle these situations instead of reflexively like, they shot at me, now I must kill them, okay, I understand people's reflexive action that, if somebody shoots at you, yes. Now, could the officers have thought of a better way to not put themselves in this situation to get shot and also remove this person? I think they could have.
I'm open to suggestions to hear that, but
it's just for me. If once somebody
if an officer
with a lethal firearm, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that you should give the officer the complete ability to neutralize that threat to the fullest extent. I'm not saying 57 bullets need to be put in his body, but if a police officer is fired upon, they're thinking about going home to their family as well, and they should have the right to defend themselves. As for what they could have done differently, what would you suggest?
I don't disagree, Dylan, by the way.
How they approach the forest differently when trying to clear these people out?
So
you don't disagree, right, Philly?
I don't disagree that if this person shot at them, that shooting back at him is justified. So I was trying to be a step ahead of that. Like, before the cops even put themselves in danger of getting shot, how could they have handled this situation better? And this not only handles this case, but law enforcement across America. I never thought the way that they handled the Breonna Taylor situation was that whole way that the SWAT was set up, that was organized and very, like, it seemed haphazard. Law enforcement, their philosophy of just brute force sometimes puts them in unnecessary danger, as well as, obviously, it puts the public at danger.
Can the course of events I find perplexing. Can I read this out very quickly? Would that be offend anybody? So this is the account on Wikipedia, the most authoritative source in the internet. At approximately 9 a.m. during the cleanup operation, as law enforcement was moving through the property, I was watching the body cam footage as well. Tom, thanks for pointing me out to that. It doesn't show the shooting itself, but it just showed a distance. Officers gave verbal commands to the man who did not comply. Officers then used a less lethal pepperball launcher device in an attempt to remove him from the tent, after which Tehran allegedly fired 4 shots from the Smith & Wesson, striking the Georgia patrol trooper multiple times. 6 troopers that were also on scene returned fire. So 6 troopers returned fire, 57 shots. It's just a lot. What I'm perplexed by is it seems as though he never left the tent until, and I saw in the footage, they peel back the tent, they look inside. He never left the tent during the shooting. He's a really good shot to shoot that Georgia State Patrol trooper in a dingy.
Well, one shot hit out of 4, right? So
they say multiple times.
At what distance was he shooting from? I don't think it'd be, if it's like 50 feet or something. I don't think it'd be too difficult to hit him once out of 4 shots.
Through fabric, when your vision's obscured, it might be really difficult.
I mean, he could have been peeking out the thing.
Maybe, yeah.
He can hear voices and how close they are as well. Like, my thing is, like, painting this picture. So it's numerous different units all in a line walking through the forest. By far the majority of the people that they're clearing out are people just standing around in the trees, just standing there with like flashlights and stuff, right? It's in the middle of the day, so it's not like dark, but they're all holding flashlights because they were there throughout the night. Then they come up on one person in a tent, or they don't even know if a person's in the tent. They start yelling, nobody's answering. They keep yelling for them to come out, and then shots start coming, or bullets start coming out of the tent instead. This is the way they paint it.
I'm looking at this footage. Tom, I'm looking at this footage right now. This thing is surrounded by trees. You couldn't. The cops almost look like the trees in their uniforms.
What?
Here, I'll show you the footage. This is the body cam footage that Tom is talking about here, where we're talking about like people. Yeah. I'll put it in the group chat. Like it's possible. Like what we were talking about is perfectly possible. I'm not seeing it.
And so yeah, they're coming through. Shots ring out of this tent. There's tons of police all around. I think all police would just turn and start shooting, right? It's not one person putting 57 bullets into the tent. It's like tons of police all just turn and start firing into the tent. They don't know where the person is in the tent.
Be clear,
they don't know how many people are in there shooting.
Yeah. But very quickly though, we're not talking 57 bullets. We're talking about 57 bullet wounds
that hit him. So yes.
So the number I'm going to wager is going to be significantly higher, given they're shooting blind into a tent, right?
Right. So yeah. So like the scenario to me makes sense. That's still a lot of freaking bullets. But like the scenario makes sense that you don't know how many people are in this tent, how many guns there are, or if you're even hitting the person. You have no idea if you're hitting them. And so you got a ton of police there, and everybody just turns and starts just like letting out into this tent with bullets.
But Tom, so in the just very, very quickly, Dylan, I apologize. In the absence of a verbal response, why would your immediate impulse, like even when they talk about firing the less lethal pepperball device, they gave verbal commands to him from a distance from the tent. I have it up here. You can see what distance they're at. Maybe he doesn't hear him. Then they immediately start firing what are pepper ball launchers? Is that like pepper spray, like a pepper spray launcher or something? They immediately start firing that in. Like they open fire on people who we don't even know if they're awake. Like,
wait, here's a question: if they were too far away to get hit by him, why were they close enough to them hit him?
Well, it's not clear to me that they were necessarily. They have a clear target in the form of the tent itself. We don't know. I don't know if we know how many rounds in total were actually expended. It could have been like 3 times that amount. And they just got lucky 57 times.
I mean, that would have hitting him like 57 times. That'd be. I just
look dude had a rusty fucking handgun.
I feel like this is now dominating the panel. This when we should be talking about the effects of Cop City more. We're getting back to like the moral implications of this.
Fair.
We can stay on this if we want to, but like this is like an incident from 2 years ago. Don't have all the body cam footage to look through, and it's just gonna be like guessing if he had like good enough aim to do this, and if we believe the Georgia Bureau of Investigation on like the 9mm ammo.
But yeah, well, so the reason why I think that that's important is because, like I said, that this is the crux of the whole issue. The fact that we don't have body cam footage when this happened 10 months ago, the fact
Not
that
enough body cam footage. Some, just not enough.
Well,
yeah,
so
not enough.
Let's get into the racketeering charges then. The 61 people, I believe, are charged with racketeering. Same, Fulton County are charging that many people with racketeering within the Stop Cop City movement. I read this a while ago. I should have read up on it again, but a lot of it was like funding into getting weapons and Molotov cocktails, money laundering. There are numbers of tons of people who aren't really like directly involved with the movement that are also arrested for funding and making calls and helping in some way. Does anybody have specific issues with the racketeering charges? Georgia, like Fulton County is well known for overusing racketeering, right? Like even a lot of people who are upset with Donald Trump feel like racketeering is not the right charge for him, and they've been like setting records with racketeering charges for a while, where that, and they're very good at it too. That like you get charged with racketeering with the city of Atlanta, there's a 90% chance you're going to get convicted of it. And so yeah, the racketeering charges in this case, a lot of people think is overkill.
Jesus Christ.
Is everybody looking up the racketeering charges right now?
Again, man, I concentrate on the environmental stuff, and I shot out all my bullets at the start. Well, okay, I can't talk about the racketeering stuff. Can I talk about another thing that's been brought up about this, though? And I'll let Sunday handle it. He'll be my knight in shining armor.
Do your thing.
So, I see a lot of people trying to talk about like terrorism and how to use the word terrorism and when to charge people with terrorism and if the people involved here were terrorists or not. I don't know why we need to classify what we've always called rioting now as terrorism. When you go to like France or any other well-developed Western democracy and you check out the riots that happen on over there, people throwing rocks and all this other stuff at the police, they don't charge them all with domestic terrorism. And the reason why is I think there is a significant difference between going into a crowded movie theater and shooting a bunch of people for your God and throwing a rock at a police officer. I think there's a significant difference between these two things. And using the same word and using the same legal statutes to charge these two things, which are going to increase the penalty for these crimes massively, give prosecutors a lot of wiggle room that they don't deserve, I think is unfair and quite frankly anti-democratic. If we lived in any other society where we like let's say lived in any other society, if we were talking about China and we said that the Hong Kong protesters were charged with terrorism and given 35 years behind bars, every single Redditor would come out and be hitting the people were like, this is terrible, and it would be terrible, and I would agree with the Redditor. I would put on the fedora with them. And I think it's wrong in this instance, as some people are trying to do, like designating Antifa as a terrorist organization, even though it's not a formal organization. So I don't even know how that would be done. But I think that we just call it rioting like we always have, and like most other Western well-developed democracies have done in the past. Now, I think things like planting bombs at offices where people are going to come to kill them, or like mowing down people, or doing terrorism as most people know terrorism to be, the direct targeting of civilians in order to intimidate people into political concessions. I think we shouldn't get that mixed up with rioting. I think these two things, one thing is like 10 times more serious than the other, and to mix these two things up downplays what most people consider terrorism.
If I may, I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to push back a tiny bit, because I think the critical issue here is that we're using terrorism, or terrorism is being used as a term, because of its connotations of specific types of violence, when what terrorism like historically denotes is like a cohesive like idea is specifically some type of act done to create a spectacle that provokes some kind of political action in turn. And so, for example, like sometimes an act of terrorism can be materially significantly less severe than a riot. Sometimes an act of terrorism can be, for instance, the threat of a bomb, not even a bomb, just the threat of a bomb. Things of that sort. Like total loss of human life may be non-existent, but it still does its work. And I think what's crucial there is when we're talking about people throwing rocks at a police officer, we're not talking about somebody attempting to assert some kind of power over the demos or the state as a whole by doing something that sort of indiscriminately threatens it, so it has like a fear response to it. What we're talking about is a citizen or a subject of a state interacting with one of its functionaries in a specific type of really localized contention. And I think it would be really, it's really important to actually like get back to a very technical understanding of these terms, precisely so they can't be used as propaganda in that way to pathologize people who are either in some senses literally just exercising their democratic rights and getting caught up with other people who are perhaps exceeding them, and things of that sort. Like I think, for example, this might be a little bit controversial. I think there are cases where certain things that Antifa members have done probably would, in the most technical sense, could be characterized as a form of terroristic activity. So showing up at a right-wing rally, say with sticks and whatnot, like that's meant to inflict fear on those people. You're not simply protesting; you're also attempting to intimidate them. Maybe in certain cases, we even agree with the motives or even with the actions that they take in some cases. I'm a little bit more dubious on that myself, but like in those cases, we have truly an act of terrorism that if they don't do anything, well, it didn't actually cause nearly as much damage as say, like just in terms of collateral. Whether or not you think that this should be a high priority, the damage inflicted, say, on a business during a riot or something like that, like disregarding whether or not you consider some damage more important than others, like it's damage is damage. I think really emphasizing the intent criteria, the political intent criteria on terrorism, as opposed to simply trying to characterize any type of damage that is flashy and bad seeming as terrorism. I think that's going to be critical.
Well, can I ask a clarifying question then? Like, would you change like the legal definition? Because it's like, I guess generally we would think of it as like violent acts to stoke fear in people for political or religious reasons. Would we change it to like you're trying to stoke fear in the government instead and not citizens? And so we would like separate whether or not you're doing this to the government versus doing it to citizens?
Well, I think terrorism would have to be identified by some kind of clear and identifiable political motive. Like, for example, I don't think it's appropriate in the case of, I don't know, like let's say a school shooter or someone decides to use a bomb, right? Well, actually, no. I think that would be a type of terrorism. It's just not political. It's just kind of.
I mean, I agree with
social.
this.
That might be like that might actually have to be its own separate category. I don't know. Here, let me just for sake of refreshing. So the U.S. Code definition, acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal codes of the United States. I don't like that. Acts dangerous to human life as being a condition. it's both too broad and too restrictive. I think there are acts of terror that are not dangerous to human life that are still acts of terror and probably should also face some kind of reprisal. Appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce the civilian population. I don't like this appear to be. I think that's too loose once again. I would want to have something explicit. And to influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion. I think that's definitional.
You said explicit, but the thing you talked about earlier, for example, like Antifa guys like going to an event with sticks or like guilds and stuff. Those things could be used for self-defense at those rallies, and that sounds silly, but it's absolutely true. Definitely, when you talk about the organization like the Proud Boys coming out to a town, and these are a group that just goes out looking for a fight. Would that be a type of terrorism if the message that is sending is don't attack members of the community? If, for example, there was some neo-Nazi group that after the horrific slaughter in southern Israel came out and started like, we're gonna go fuck with these Jews at their religious institution, and people surrounded it with their AR-15s, is that terrorism?
I want to answer quickly, and then we're going to go to Philly.
Sure. I want to see you halfway there because I take your point. Because once again, we're still wrestling with the connotations of terrorism. So my more technical usage sort of relies upon it being denuded of that connotation. That's not really an option in present day. So, like, I would be personally fine with characterizing a defensive display as at the very least having an intrinsically terroristic element. But I wouldn't characterize it as terrorism, quote unquote, in the way we kind of pathologize it today, where we talk about like scary men taking over planes and wantonly blowing up buildings, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'll have to think about that. That's an interesting question.
These terms are, I want to use words that are communicatable to people in common parlance in the best way possible. Words and their meanings change over time. And how terrorism was used
I agree.
in France originally,
but there's a
the way it is used has just changed so radically. And I feel like by using these words in a way that's too broad, we're going to end up muddying the waters. And that's exactly what I would fear from a nation that passed the Patriot Act. I would, the last thing I'd want to do is start playing loose and fun with the term terrorism. Definitely when we're talking about charging people with terrorism charges under the law.
Yeah. So quick response to that. The usage that I'm suggesting, the usage that I'm suggesting where it seems more broad, it's actually significantly more restrictive. I'm restricting it very carefully to specific kinds of activity instead of relying on connotations that use the incident of the spectacle to characterize it after the fact. And so the reason why things like the Patriot Act were able to, the reason why we've been able to characterize so much so broadly as terrorism is precisely because it wasn't acts that were specified. It was acts combined with spectacle combined with inference, all of which can be fed into by all of these different sectors. Who are we at war with? Who has resentment, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes as nebulous as some treatments of hate crimes, where it's like, in some cases, it's a reasonable inference. In others, it's like, I don't know. Like, I can see it. I can, if I have like a certain standpoint, I can see it more. If I have a certain standpoint, I can see it less. But there's not a whole lot there that's really publicly accessible. And that's what I'm worried about avoiding. So I agree with you, but by the same token, I think that there's different kinds of broadness and different kinds of tightness. Sorry.
Yeah, Philly, go ahead.
I think like right after 9/11, the FBI, they got obsessed with this, with cracking down on terrorism, understandably. And that's when the definition broadened out. I think, Dylan, you were pointing to this with the Patriot Act and all this. This is when the definition of terrorism kind of expanded. And what ended up happening was lobbyists for major corporations that have been dealing with so-called eco-terrorists throughout the 80s and 90s, like the Animal Liberation Front and the Earth Liberation Front. They were charged with like the domestic terrorism for their environmental, protest actions. So it's, to answer your question, Tom, the definition is going to change depending on what the government and the FBI or what they're trying to do. With the RICO Act that you were mentioning earlier, the FBI, as people probably know, first introduced this to bring down the mob. This act was so successful that the states started to adopt it and to write the RICO Act into law, and it's a way for the government to kind of twist narratives, as we see them do a lot, and drum up charges and make and take down whatever they're trying to take down. Because at the end of the day, the FBI hates the left. They always have hated the left. They hate any kind of protest, rioting, any kind of unrest that could rise to the point of them not being in complete control. If you just give me 1 second, I want to find exactly what happened here. Somebody else can talk for a second.
Yeah, go ahead. Dylan, I did want to get your answer to the question as well. Like, would you differentiate like the definition based on whether or not they're trying to stoke fear in the government versus civilians, or how would you want to change it? I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't think I would differentiate it too much, because a lot of times, for example, if I go out and I kill 300 people I'm not going to run up a scenario, but I did that in order to make the government change a policy, that could be connected to the fact that I'm trying to make the people of that country make their government change that policy because they don't want something like that to happen again. That is directed at the government, but it's also in a way directed at the people. And when we talk about like directing it towards the government, for example, there are people in the city of Atlanta who support Cop City. There is footage of activists going around talking to people, saying, yeah, I support Cop City. That doesn't mean it was the majority, but if we were to direct violent action towards Cop City or cops around Cop City, for those people, for the people who support the project, they would consider it, in a way, almost intimidation against them as well, or intimidation against the people that they voted for in office. It's not that simple, but I still believe that we have, and this is the major thing I want to push in this conversation, that we have the word rioting for a reason. For well over 100 years, we've always used this term to describe what the vast majority of what we've seen around Cop City as rioting, and we've described it as like that for the longest period of time. This seems like an attempt to try to make these crimes look worse or sound worse than they are, and trying to tear it to some of the most tragic periods in American history, 9/11, Boston bombings, that has left many Americans scared. And so if you tie it to the same word, no one wants to be associated with the terrorist movement of Stop Cop City. Because now it's not, oh, they rioted, which is like, well, you know, that's bad maybe, but it's not. No, now they're terrorists. Now nobody's going to want to be associated with the terror movement.
Sure.
Even the term riot or emerged under the same conditions, it does the exact same work, no?
If anybody wants to send super chats to any one of these guys and ask a question, they can read it if they'd like to, or if you'd like to jump into my Discord, I'm streaming on YouTube. You can jump in the waiting room and hop on to ask somebody a question. We're probably going to wrap up in a little bit because President Sunday has somewhere else to be.
My thing's not till 6. I've got like quite a bit of time still. I'm good.
I don't know what 6 is. It's 7:30 right now for me. So is that
well, you're 3 hours ahead of me.
Okay. So, oh wow. Okay.
I'm at 4:30.
So yeah,
I've got like an hour or so.
If you guys want to jump in the waiting room, we can pull one person in at a time to ask some questions. Yeah, sorry. Philly, did you find what you were looking for?
No. Well, actually, so back in, I guess, what was that, 2019 2017, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, there were a lot of people trying to push for domestic terrorism statutes or changes to the statutes and charged James Fields, who murdered Heather Heyer, with domestic terrorism. And like the FBI explicitly came out against that, even though they would go on to, I think, 2 years later, classify or upgrade the far right as domestic terrorist threats. So the FBI and law enforcement pick and choose. I'm not trying to be like conspiracy brain, but they really do pick and choose where they put their resources, where they allocate their time and their money. And right now it seems like eco-terrorism, eco-saboteurs, whatever you want to call them, they are the focus. The Intercept had a great article called "The Green Scare" on this. I'm gonna drop that in our group chat. But yeah, That's pretty much all I have to add to that.
All right.
I just want to just emphasize quickly, when we see what's going on, for example, with Hamas and Israel right now, I think the usefulness to be able to describe the difference between the targeting of IDF tanks and IDF military checkpoints, and being able to describe the slaughtering of children, women, and elderly people, like being able to describe these two things differently is not only useful, but I think important for common parlance. And we can see from the way how toxic the online discourse is around this right now, that people's thoughts around how the word terrorism and what is an innocent civilian, what isn't an innocent civilian, what is a person that could be targeted militarily with it being justified and not being terrorism, what isn't a person that could be targeted that way. I think it's really important to apply just apply this word extremely carefully, which I have seen no effort from American politicians to do that.
I would agree with that, and I want to go back a little bit to there as well, though. See, with respect to the targeting of IDF tanks and the targeting of innocent civilians, and it gets sketchier as well in the Israeli case because there's compulsory service. So I don't see a firm distinction between civilians and military men, and I would lean more to treating them in the former category precisely because they don't have that choice. I would be perfectly comfortable with characterizing both as acts of terror first, because here's what you actually have to do at the end of the day when you're discussing this, because the debates do happen. Like, Israel's done a lot of bad shit to the Palestinians in a similar manner as Hamas does, maybe even in certain cases on a much grander scale just because of capacity. But you don't justify it in terms of scale, or you don't condemn it in terms of scale. You condemn it in terms of this act of terror also involved wanton murder of innocent people. And so you actually scale down the language and you get actually a little bit more intimate. Now you're talking about like human relations. This is a monstrous act done to specific individuals in a barbaric and cruel and destructive, whatever, things like that. I think, once again, like leaving the act of terrorism to a specific tactic actually adds clarity. It doesn't add broadness to its application, because now it's actually a bit more restrictive. Now you're talking about, well, a rioter, you think this person who was like breaking down a store window and carrying off some stuff, you think they were trying to make a political statement? No, they were caught up in a crowd. They were breaking stuff because there was either like a state of lawlessness, or this was associated with the baddies from the vantage point of the group. Police stations burned down. They're not necessarily planning a statement.
Stealing too. I mean, they're stealing. It could just be thieves.
It can be both. Yeah.
I mean, I got a $2 super chat from the Trib One. I assume this question is for Dylan. He says, "Would you count January 6th as an act of terror or a riot?"
There's certain acts during January 6th that I would consider. For example, the placing of the pipe bomb. Like placing a bomb near the DNC and the RNC, two political institutions, I think is clearly terrorism under everyone's definition, right? But I do think scuffling with police isn't necessarily terrorism. I think if somebody is trying to get into, the Capitol to try to get to the politicians and attack them and kill them or something like that, that could be terrorism. But then we have to break down the individual motives of every person. So are they just getting in there because they're unbelievably stupid and thought smashed window was a door entrance, or were they going in there because they had intentions of trying to get to Nancy Pelosi and truly stop this taking over of our democracy, right? And we can see how these people were treated, right? When we get to the higher level people that I do think were deliberately organizing raids on the Capitol to try to stop the certification of the vote, a lot of the Proud Boys people, Joe Briggs, those types, they're being treated differently than somebody like the QAnon shaman who got left out early like half of the time. Like, what was it, like 20? He was sentenced to 41 months. He got out 27 for good behavior. I think that this is just an example of like, look, I don't like the QAnon shaman. I don't think he's learned his lesson. He's now going to become like a martyr. But I don't know if I would use the word terrorist to describe him, even if he's like a knuckle-dragging oxygen thief.
Okay.
Yeah, it comes a lot into it comes down to an intent. But I was going to ask. I also have a question for you, Dylan. So if the first people who got into the Capitol and that remember the security guard or the police, excuse me, was like leading them in a different direction from where all the senators and congressmen were, and they like having to walk right by Nancy Pelosi's office. What do you think? And then one dude, wasn't they like kicking on her door? Maybe it was another
They got in her
congresswoman.
door, and then they got like the evacuation plans for senators and Congress people, and we're like looting. We got, Channel 5, Andrew Callahan just came out with a piece, putting aside Andrew Callahan's business, but he got original footage. It was the first time the QAnon shaman actually talked to the press like they did with him, and they gave him a bunch of footage. They took the day and they gave to no one, and they hid it from investigators. And it showed that they were like looting evacuation plans. Now, if you're trying to get evacuation plans to find out where the senators and all the politicians are, like that gives me an idea about their motivations. As for the cops leading them around, as far as I know, what happened is once the multiple entrances had been smashed in, like the windows, at a certain point, the DC Police Department was just so overwhelmed that they were told to stop interacting with them for their own safety after, what was it, like hundreds and hundreds of police injuries, cops losing fingers, one cop's getting almost like crushed to death because of like the human waves. They at that point were like, look, we've gotten the cops as far away as we can. We need to prioritize officer safety until we have reinforcements from the Maryland National Guard. So they stopped interacting with them. They never said, hey, everybody, like, come in and do stuff. It was, we're not going to engage with you. That's why you saw that one cop running from the QAnon shaman and the rest of them while telling the other officers, coming up to this floor, before he got to reinforcements. Then they stopped.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they would have done if they actually had encountered one of the Nancy Pelosi or AOC or somebody?
I think it depends on the person, but I think there's people in that crowd that would have legitimately beaten her worse than they beat the police.
Well, I mean, when they entered, it's like they looked like they were just in awe of even being in the building. A lot of them, it was you were watching. They're like,
it was this easy? Yeah, they were just surprised how easy it was to get in there.
I think there were a lot of people just joining in the mob just because everybody else was doing it, and then there were other people with very specific plans, very specific goals. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were there for.
And those
they were
people
like
got much
pulling out
harsher
blueprints
sentences.
and freaking crap.
Enrique Tarrio, he got like 17 years. Joe Biggs got like 14 years. QAnon shaman got 27 months after he was sentenced to 41. So I think that shows.
He got to have the most fun that day too. He got to stand right on the podium, a speaker. That's pretty cool. I mean,
now he's got a career, dude. That dude's gonna be fine for you, dude. He's gonna be able to do.
He's got a whole career made off
where he gets to go around and just yell freedom, and he gets like $20,000 for yelling that. And speaking of events, he's gonna be fine.
Yep. There was. Oh crap! I just pressed the wrong button. I also wanted to
guide my own meditation.
All right, hold on. I'll be right back.
Of our sponsor, National Instruments, Belcampo, Athletic.
So President Sunday, you're beefing with Dev, I think.
Oh, he's not going to respond to that. Did he? Did he respond to it?
I don't know. I
oh God, no, he's never. He's not going
to see if he would respond to it. He didn't seem like.
What'd you send to him?
Yeah, I sent it to him because I thought it was like, oh, that's interesting, right?
The Marx
I know
thing, right?
you and I know him, and I was just like, hey, and I sent it to him.
You're talking about the Karl Marx thing.
Yeah, Short Fat Otaku, the YouTuber.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I've criticized him before, so I wasn't sure if you were talking about the really reason. I'd be down. I mean, if I were him, I wouldn't accept the invitation. He's really categorically wrong. Even Community Notes got him with this one, which for Karl Marx is, that's an achievement. But if he's game, I'd definitely be down. I don't anticipate he's going to respond to me though.
I don't host debates much, but I'd do it if he was up for it.
Really?
Yeah, I'd do it.
I would be honored to have you host that, Dylan. That sounds
out of
like
retirement just for you, President Sunday.
That sounds like a good old time.
I hosted a debate between two journalists on if Israel's an apartheid state recently, and I was happy enough with how I managed it that I'd be willing to do it like on a few occasions and like at least flirt with it a little.
I've been talking to people. I think I was actually talking to String a little bit earlier. It's been legitimately heartening to see you actually escape the loony bin and actually make something of yourself in the real world. So good on you. It's been.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've appreciated the stuff that you've been
There's still hope, it means. But we'll see.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, like, with the protests after BLM, the people that I was protesting with, one of the main objectives was that they wanted better police training. That was one of the, I forget the group that I was with, but
Wait, Tom, you were a BLM protester?
yeah, it was the biggest organization that I can remember. I'm totally blanking on the group, but the one of the things, yeah, was like better police training, that like they went over objectives. These are the things that we want. These are the things that we're looking for. Is Cop City a good idea if they just move it somewhere else and make some changes to it? Or like, because it seems like this is answering what citizens wanted in some fashion. So is it a good idea just with some changes, and what changes would that be?
Are you asking the panel as a whole or just Philly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if I can, forgive me for just jumping in. I think in terms of like one of the achievements of BLM early on was that things like, for example, what happened with George Floyd. There are now there's now strict regulation and training about that sort of thing that's been heavily reinforced. People have been paying a lot more attention to that kind of thing. I think in terms of training cops, like the type of training matters, right? Like just using this word training as like a blanket justification for whatever it is this institution is doing doesn't make sense when the training involves specifically firearm usage, the use of explosives, and presumably also, again, like I don't have info on this. I'm drawing an inference. Why would cops need a military-style recreation of a city? I can only fathom it's because they're training for riot control. There is already a massive, like university-sized campus in Georgia already. I think the largest in the states, where cops go for training. The kind of training that cops need to do a better job in terms of how they interface with civilians, how they de-escalate potentially violent situations, and so on and so forth. That is not going to be facilitated by them shooting better.
All right, Philly?
I think they need to move it into the middle of nowhere, the middle of the state, I guess. Find somewhere outside the city. I think that it just would be better optics, better, easily more digestible for the general public who are opposed to this. It's happening either way, it seems like. So, I mean, to the people who are protesting, I mean, I guess you would have to shift your focus to what you were talking about, like what kinds of training. So it really, like, so for me, what I was talking about earlier is the type of training that would get that person out of the woods safely and not get a cop shot. Better techniques on extraction, better techniques on SWAT teams and the way that they enter houses. A lot of times it's very dangerous for cops. Busting down the door, and announcing you're there, so you give the person inside a chance to get ready. Then you bust down the door. A lot of times a smoke grenade or something will go in, but you know, somebody has a high artillery weapon, that's when cops start getting shot. So I think a less brute force method and a more of a like, how do we get everybody home safely? Even if they would have to have surrounded the woods and just smoked them out, you know, waited for him to run out of food, waited for him to run out of supplies. He would have had to surrender at some point. Maybe think about ways to address things like that, you know?
Dylan?
So, I mean, the environmental issues that I brought up, all they can really do in the location that they have is try to like, well, we'll decrease tree canopy degradation of this project by like 10%, maybe like 15%. But when the South River is already so polluted, I don't think explosive materials being added to the South River is going to be particularly helpful for communities that are already dealing with high rates of pollution, for communities that are already dealing with high rates of asthma. And Atlanta has a very special thing by having 48% of its city covered in these types of spaces, and it would really suck to see them get rid of it. This facility could be hosted elsewhere, but if it is hosted elsewhere, I also want to make sure that their statements about, oh, it'll be de-escalation training, and oh, it'll be the most progressive policies in the country, and that's what the Atlanta police chief is saying, that they're not just blowing smoke up everyone's ass to see if they can get it past people. And from the conduct of the city council, it kind of feels like they're blowing smoke up everyone's ass. The process has not been the most particularly transparent, and whether they move it to another location, that solves the environmental issue more, but it doesn't solve the structural policing issues. But I do believe that in some instances, there needs to be more invested into policing. In the United States, cops get what? Like on average 27 weeks of police training? Now it depends on what type of training it is, but no matter what type of training you shove into those 27 weeks, that is not enough to train a police officer. I understand people are talking about staffing shortages of police officers, but if the cops we're putting on the street don't have the proper experience when we put them on the street, they're not going to do as good of a job, and is going to lead to more interactions with locals that are negative, that give terrible attention to the police, hurt the relationship between police and the community, and it is going to lead to the continued degradation of the relationship between those policed and the police.
Yeah, and for those listening, it wasn't just protests. There's also over 100,000 names on a petition.
16,000.
160,000?
16.
Okay. 16. Okay, so yeah, so in
maybe they need
city council, I
58,000?
believe, yeah, something like that.
52,
And they
52.
city council is refusing to open the petitions, count them, even engage with them whatsoever. Go ahead.
If I can ask Dylan a question quickly, because maybe he knows more about this than I do. This is not my forte. When you talk about the police needing more funding, I don't know if you were just speaking very generally, but when I look at the
saying that
budget,
I'm not saying that they need more like APCs or something. I'm saying
well,
that
just
the
in
money
terms
that
of
they
strict
get,
cash, right?
that there's certain aspects of policing that if we're going to extend the length of police training programs, that's going to cost more money. And everybody that I talk to, from police officers to people who are anti-police violence activists, all seem to agree that whether or not you disagree with what should be taught, the period of time that they have to absorb what they're taught and be taught everything that they need, like better de-escalation tactics, which, I mean, the military in some aspects has better de-escalation tactics than the police force, which is
that's a crazy complex like social thing, de-escalating, especially when you're not like
That's what they say. They want to use the what's it called?
Urban housing
makeshift city that they're creating for.
The urban housing center, yeah.
Sure, because you need that for that. But very quickly, so in terms of like the actual cash that would be required to achieve this, and given that the philosophy behind this approach presumably would also necessitate proportionally less and less military grade equipment and so on and so forth, as you say, APCs and whatnot. When I look at the budget for what's that?
Send it to Ukraine instead.
Oh yeah. When I look at the budget for Atlanta, and I am not great at reading this, I see that they allocate overwhelmingly most of their budget towards policing. It's God, I made that too small. $235.7 million, I believe. The fire department is second at 107 million, non-department 94, and then everything else is under 100 million, going slowly down. City planning, 52 million, 20 million for executive offices, Department of Law, 7 million. Like it seems like it's being funded just out the wazoo. But I don't know what that translates into practically. But I think of that as well in connection with the fact that we have all these foundations that are not like that aren't under the same restrictions as the actual police department, the actual the actual spending of the city budget, that are also supplying things like weapons, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if more money is necessarily even in the cards at all as a necessity at this juncture. It seems like just a reallocation of given resources probably should have the same effect.
I think it depends. For example, I think a massive police retraining program is going to take a pretty big initial investment. If you're taking every police officer in the force, and I don't know how across the board you would have your like police reformation program, whatever you would call it, would be, but I would personally favor a large initial investment to retrain every police officer into the new standards, or at least make sure that they could apply to the new standards, which would probably take some level of training. more than the 27 weeks that they got initially as a cadet. Probably be easier for people who have been on the force 15, 16, 17 years. Probably wouldn't need the same amount of time as a new cadet would be, maybe a shorter program, but I would want something that would be pretty across the board. I don't know the exact numbers for that program because we're talking about a mythical program right now that I haven't laid out all the details for. But if it ended up if we ended up finding that initially the investment would end up being larger in order to do this retraining program, I would be fine with that initial investment. That would probably also include, though, relocation of resources from other parts of the police department, from areas that I think are less useful, into this retraining program and into these other policies.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we're more or less in agreement because one of the primary issues here with policing in the United States is that standards are only enforced, I believe, at a departmental level. That's what I've been told. And so what you're talking about is actually what somebody in my chat was suggesting earlier, that this new site could potentially somehow, by magic, I suppose, flower out as like the beginning of like standardization of police across the board.
That's what Atlanta's trying to sell it as. I'm not saying you should trust that sell, but their selling point is that it's supposed to be the most progressive policing center in the entire country, and that they're going to replace some of their offices with classrooms instead, with teachers that teach de-escalating and like racial inclusivity and stuff like that.
Which again, like they have the Fleck location as well, which is already a massive university campus, so there's no reason for that. But if I'm hearing you correctly, so what you're basically saying is, as a compromise with like current spending, if you had an additional like large injection of cash that freed up officers to have like this in-depth training, so that they were better on the ground in socially complicated situations.
Because we both want to change the standards around policing, I assume so.
Or to have them exist,
So in order to do that, that's going to take, unless we're going to fire the entirety of the police force and just replace them with new people, like we did with the Baathists in Iraq, which was a disaster. Unless we're going to do that, then we're going to have to find some way to retrain those who exist, especially since there's also police unions that protect these people tooth and nail.
Well, what I'm getting at here is, let's look at the Baathists, for example. We're talking about removing these people. There isn't, strictly speaking, a these people with police because there is no federal oversight of any substance. So I think what you would actually be looking for is and good luck with this as well for other reasons. You'd want to establish some kind of federal body that actually standardizes how police training is done.
On the federal level, I do think that there should be more federal standards across the board because a lot of the local police departments treat like it's the Wild West. Right, and they treat their cops like the good old boys. And for example, the shooting of Rashard Brooks, which is in Atlanta, I believe as well. If you watch the body cam footage, which I was actually watching in preparation for today.
He's the one who was sleeping in the parking lot, right?
Yeah, he was the one. Well, he was drunk in the parking. He wasn't drunk. He was drunk in the Wendy's drive-thru. Like he fell asleep while in it, and then they directed him away. And then when they tried to arrest him, he like went for their taser and he started running away, and then like shot at them. And the entire Rayshard Brooks situation is extremely messy. There was mistakes that the police officers made. Obviously, you shouldn't go for a taser and start firing it at the police. But no matter how you perceive this situation, I agree with the critiques that once he shot the second taser, he was essentially unarmed. Police officers should know that. But putting that aside, no matter how you view it, after that shooting ended, they start talking about it, saying like, oh, he shot this thing at me. And one of the cops that had come to the scene turned to them and said, stop, camera, stop talking about it. And that type of relationship with the local Atlanta community, that type of stuff being seen, that is the type of trust that needs to be, I think, built up from the ground level up. And that's gonna take retraining. Because that person, I don't know the exact years they had in the force, but you learn that stuff, and you learn to say that stuff initially after a shooting, after years of experience on the force. You're like, this is somebody giving advice to somebody who's never been in that situation before, assumingly meaning that he's been in that situation before, and he's told people to shut the fuck up when people can hear him. The people as in the citizens of the area, because they know they're going to release that footage. And so
and I know for people listening, that's obviously good advice, but the police are not going to give that advice to any other suspects, anybody else that they're investigating, but they will give it to another police officer. They will give it to another police officer, and that's the issue with it.
They look out for their own over the citizens in a lot of instances. That's why I believe like protect our right. That's my slogan, because you got, again, the police are there to protect you, but you need something to protect you from the police.
So I agree with you to the point that like people like cops who have these attitudes and who have these behaviors, they need to be retrained. But I wonder if that's not putting a band-aid on the issue or even solving it at all, simply because that's precisely the obfuscation that's being used to justify things like the Cop City installation. I think like the priority really needs to be federal oversight and leave training secondary to that. And once you have the standards, then
wouldn't federal oversight also require a ton of investment? I mean, like for example, if we have federal oversight, we're going to have to hire so many bureaucrats to go around to these police departments and be like, sir, did you say the N-word on March 12th when interacting with so-and-so? And then they're going to have to go around, they're going to have to examine all these police departments, make sure they're not engaged in racial discrimination.
Well, but hang on. Yeah, but hang on a sec, though. But you're going to have to do that anyways if you're going to argue that we're going to have to retrain according to some standards all these different departments, because what's going to maintain standards? Make sure they're being fulfilled, administer them. Like, like you're still dealing with the same principles. The difference is whether or not there is a body that's actually ensuring this is happening.
That's true, but once we find the problem and identify the problem, which federal oversight is going to do, I just find it hard to believe that fixing a problem isn't going to require any financial investment.
I agree with you. There's no argument there, but bureaucracy takes money. I think you would necessarily have an expansion of the bureaucracy to achieve that. I don't see what else you would do.
I think it would. I think a lot of it would actually, depending on the community, I think this federal oversight would actually lead to some communities possibly getting federal help and assisting their policing more. Definitely in areas that have much slower police response times, like 40 minutes to 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you read some of these Justice Department reports that they do on police departments every few years, New York City had a big one, Philadelphia had a big one recently. They make very clear and I think precise and very palatable recommendations for police departments to follow. The problem is the police departments just ignore them. So where the federal oversight will come in is, if you're not following the standards to the federal standard, then we're going to cut funding. We're going to, the funding comes from the state, but I think a federal oversight could kind of manage that part of it. And like Sunday was saying, where the change is going to come from is, whether it be the police captain, whoever who's trying to follow by these guidelines, they're going to be incentivized less and less to buck the system and kind of go against whatever the guidelines that are set, if you're threatening with funding and all that, because that's I think what is going to move the needle one way or the other is money. So as soon as we figure that part out, I think we can make some progress.
I did run a poll earlier at the beginning of the panel, asked if Cop City should be stopped. We got 27% said yes, 33% said no, and 38% said not sure out of over 200 votes. So now that everybody's heard your arguments, I'm running another poll to see if anybody's changed their mind. Again, if you guys would like to send super chats to get any questions in, or if you want to jump into the Discord, we're streaming on YouTube. The link's in the description. You can hop in real quick and ask a question. Did any of you guys have any questions from your audience that you wanted to bring up?
No, but I mean, it's a little unfair because every single person on the panel was more or less against Cop City except for the moderator. And I'm pretty sure you're not like super on board either necessarily, so.
Not super on board, no.
Yeah, I just don't think, like I said in the beginning, I don't think the Atlanta Police Department has earned this, to at least to where I'm from. I'm hearing from people in Atlanta. I'm not there. I don't interact with the police department there. But what, Dylan, you had referred to a poll earlier this debate.
The polling on this is garbage. I didn't refer to a poll. There was a period in, I believe it was 2021, where they had like a bunch of residents, like 1,100 people comment on what was happening. And from that, it was like 70% of the people who commented were against it, like solidly. Now, the problem is with that is, if any of you have ever been to city council of anywhere, you know that the people who show up to that are not just a Joe Schmo. Like, that's an exact way to poll what everybody thinks about, what everybody thinks about an issue.
Yeah.
For example, Trump supporters much more vocal than Biden supporters. Trump lost the election. So it's not a solid science.
Well, that being said, there were apparently a lot at this one. It was a bustling meeting before they approved it.
Well, and there were, I can't remember exactly, but there was well over 100 people in the forest as well, right? They cleared out a lot of people from what I remember. No,
Lots of druids.
I mean, possibly. I don't know. Who's coming on, Tom? Do we have anybody or?
no, we don't have any questions. So
That means we all won the debate. No challengers. Debate victory. They have to now shut down Cop City by command of the debate god.
Sorry, Lonerbox, not today.
this panel has sealed it.
I actually don't know what Lonerbox's position is on Cop City. Has anybody heard it?
No, I don't.
Not that I know. I know that he's against the classification of the protesters as terrorists. But I mean, you know what? I'll leak a DM. He was just very open, like, you know, not a ton of research. He didn't feel like very confident.
That's respectable. I'm fine with that.
Philly.
It's just, and by the way, I do want to give him a little bit more credit too, considering everything that's going on right now, and you know, his family's from Lebanon, which is already being bombed. And good likelihood it's going to be bombed more by Hezbollah's involvement. It makes sense that he hasn't had the time recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Philly.
No, I was just gonna say I gotta run. I gotta put my daughter to bed. I do apologize.
Do you have time? Do you guys want to do closing statements real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, Philly, if you want to go ahead and give yours, if you got to go.
Just remember, he ran first.
So overall, it looks like we're not turning back. Cop City's going to happen. The most I can hope for now is that the police do not abuse this further than it seems like they've already started to. As Dylan mentioned earlier, the way that this whole thing passed and got through, it didn't follow a democratic process. It was kind of forced upon the city by people with entities with a stake in this, political power, money, whatever it was, whatever the case was. I'm not 100% against it, and I think if you ask most people, most reasonable people, the problem is not with cops. The problem is with what cops do, right? Most people want cops to police their neighborhoods. Most people want cops to interact with them, cordially, and not always be adversarial as it is in some communities. But with that being said, it's just like it seems like it's the same old when it comes to what the public wants versus what the police wants. The police usually get their way. They usually are able to, pay their way out of any situation. Very rarely are cops held accountable for the things that they do. But with this, the only thing I can hope for with this new training facility is great oversight and great effort by the police to actually engage with the community and show that this isn't just a power play.
And real quick, who are you? Where can people find you? What do you do?
I am STV Philly. You can find me at STV Philly. I also have another YouTube channel called American Confidential. And that's pretty much it. I'm not too big on like self-promotion and all that. That's it.
All right, President Sunday.
I'm just going to second the heart of, I think, what Philly was saying. I think the principal interest here is not so much whether or not Cop City is damaging or not. Like, people can democratically choose things that are negative. I think the issue here is that the people are not being given a choice, and it seems like council, mayor, and governor, and indeed police foundations are fighting tooth and nail to make sure that they don't get a choice. And I think that makes a sham of the democracy, and that's the legitimacy of the city, the state, the country as a whole. And I think that's the principal issue here. You cannot claim that it is to serve the people if you're going over and against the people's wishes to brute force it down their throats and killing some of them in the process.
And then also, where can people find you?
Oh, sorry. I'm on YouTube, President Sunday. You'll find me.
Awesome. Dylan Burns.
The coalition to stop Cop City is extremely diverse. I think most of the concentration has been on police training and how police interact with the community, but it's also an environmental issue. And protection of tree canopy is extremely important. Make sure that these communities don't can like starve off heat much easier. It's extremely useful in trying to keep communities cooler. Extremely important for stopping storm drain runoff. Extremely important to stop pollutants. Green space is one of the best ways to keep rivers and waterways clean. And the South River is one of the most not one of the most polluted in the country, but one of the most at-risk rivers in the country. And the EPA has already admitted that it needs to be cleaned, and they failed to do it from the 2010 to 2020 period that they set out to do it. And so this is an issue that everybody acknowledges. In 2019, they called this area the lungs of the area. They called it the lungs of the city. And all of a sudden, apparently you can lose one of your lungs. You can cut them out, okay? All of a sudden, now...
I mean, you can.
Now that the now that the Atlanta Police Foundation has jumped in and said they'll finance $33 million of it, which will still cost taxpayers $1.2 million for the next, 35 years. Now that the situation has changed, it's no longer the lungs of the city. Apparently, you can cut out a little bit of the lungs. Don't worry, you can live with the other one. I really feel that this issue has been ignored, and I understand that the Stop Cop City movement, a lot of it has been really fucking annoying, specifically like the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They're a bunch of knuckle draggers, and their involvement has been really stupid. I think that a lot of the people behind the movement are like kind of pencil-neck geeks, but there are also a lot of really good environmental activists. There's also a lot of really good local activists that have ties to the community and are not just some pencil pusher from the coasts. And I think that their voices should be heard, and that's why I hope the appellate court, the 11th appellate court, does not uphold the decision to suspend the extension, which activists were told that they would have from a local judge. And I believe that they should respect the will of the people of whether they want to hear explosions in their backyard. And as somebody who sometimes hears that, it's not pleasant.
And where can people find you?
I don't know, CIA.gov. You can find me there.
Are you streaming again?
Oh yeah, I stream at DylanBurns.tv. That's my website. You can check me out. It's like Destiny.gg or Vars.gg. And I stream on Twitch. And my main channel, DylanBurnsTV, is mostly for journalistic content. I'm going to be releasing an interview in a day or two, with a Brazilian International Legion fighter who used to work as a PMC in Afghanistan, settled down in Ukraine, is now, instead of fighting as a soldier of fortune, is now fighting for his home. It's a really interesting story. Hope you guys go check it out. It's an over 2-hour interview. We touch on a lot of stuff. So I hope people go check that out.
And he's been doing a lot of on the ground journalism in Ukraine as well. So that stuff's really cool. Since I ended up making arguments real quick, the new poll has should Cop City be stopped? I guess I worded it differently this time.
Oh, so the poll doesn't count anymore.
I'm not even going to read it now because I confused them. I thought we got a good result this time. Okay. Just since I ended up making arguments, pro cop city. I do have issues with the environmental issues. I live in Atlanta. I was harassed by the Red Dogs. I am a victim of police brutality, had my kneecap shattered, and still have issues with that to this day. Was in prison here in Atlanta, and so I understand a lot of these issues and I understand a lot of the concerns, but I don't like a lot of the groups, like a lot of the anarchist groups and communist groups that have been engaging in this. A lot of the rioting seems to be a little unnecessary, but I do think that with the petitions and the protests and all of that, I think that at this point it would just be insanely anti-democratic to continue with Cop City the way that it is, and so I am not in favor of it. I'm Tom Foolery Show. Tom Foolery Show on YouTube.
You're underwater, Tom.
Yeah, you've gone under the water.
Did I?
For a moment, yeah.
Yeah, just.
Okay. But yeah. weird. But yeah, Top Foolery Show on YouTube, Twitch, and Kick. I do debates mostly, but we cover lots of stuff. So check me out over here, and then you guys are welcome to hang out and continue talking if you'd like. STV Philly, Dylan, President Sunday. I appreciate you guys all coming, and it was a good conversation.
Thanks for moderating. It's really your job.
Yeah, I appreciate it. All right, yeah, I just want to say nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you Sunday. Nice to meet you Dylan. Tom, we know each other. And I will talk to you guys later.
Awesome, man.
See ya.
Later.